So let me ask you a question. Have you ever thought about the fact that the actual value of your vote could change just depending on where you live in India? Well, there's a really controversial proposal on the table right now that's set to completely redraw India's political map. And it is sparking a huge, huge debate. So let's get into it and unpack what this great divide is really all about. It really kicked off with headlines just like this one. The central government is proposing a massive redistribution of seats in the Lok Sabha, the lower house of parliament, all based on population. Now, this is way more than just some political back and forth. This is a move that could fundamentally reshape how Indian democracy works for generations. Okay, so what exactly are we talking about here? This isn't just about moving a few seats from one column to another. No, we are talking about a major change to the size, the shape, and the very makeup of India's entire lower house of parliament. Right now, as you know, the Lok Sabha has 543 seats. This new proposal could pump that number all the way up to 850. That is a huge expansion. But you know what? The real story here isn't just the bigger number. It's about where all those new seats are actually going to go. And this map just says it all, doesn't it? The increase in seats isn't going to be spread out evenly. The plan would actually trigger a pretty significant shift in political power, moving it from the southern states to the more populous northern states. And right there, that is the heart of this great divide. Just to give you an idea of how dramatic this is, let's look at the numbers for just one state. Check out Uttar Pradesh in the north. It could jump from its current 80 seats to more than 143. That is an unbelievable boost in political influence for a single state. Now, let's look at the other side of the coin, a state in the south, like Kerala. Its proportional share of the pie could actually shrink from almost 4% down to under 3%. So you see the problem, right? While some states are about to get a much, much louder voice in parliament, others might find their voice gets a little bit quieter. So this all leads to a really important question. Why is this happening right now? Is it just politics? Well, the answer is actually a bit more complicated, and it's rooted in the Constitution itself. This isn't some new idea. It's part of a process that's literally written into the country's foundational laws. Believe it or not, this whole process comes from constitutional law. Article 82 says very clearly that Parliament is supposed to readjust the seats after every census to reflect how the population has changed. Article 170 says the same thing for state assemblies. The whole point is to make sure representation stays fair. And this process of redrawing the boundaries has a name. It's called delimitation. It's handled by a very powerful Delimitation Commission. And here is the absolute kicker. Their decisions are final. They cannot be challenged in any court. That gives this whole process an incredible amount of authority. But wait, you might be thinking, if this is supposed to happen after every census, why are we still using population data from way back in 1971? Good question. Well, back in 2001, an amendment to the Constitution, the 84th, put a freeze on changing the seat allocation until after the year 2026. The idea was to encourage states to work on population control without having to worry they'd lose political power for doing a good job. Well, 2026 is right around the corner now. That freeze is about to end, and boom, the debate is back, and it's roaring. So, all of this history and context brings us right to the core of the issue. The entire debate really boils down to this fundamental clash between two pillars of how India is governed, democracy versus federalism. See, on one side, you've got the principle of democracy. One person, one vote. That idea says that a state with more people, like Uttar Pradesh, should naturally have more representatives. But on the other side, you have federalism, which argues that every state is an equal partner in the nation and deserves to have its voice heard no matter how big or small its population is. This image just captures that tension perfectly. On one side, you have democracy and federalism twisted together like DNA, each pulling in a different direction. And on the other, you see them on a balancing scale. And that's the fundamental challenge for India, isn't it? Finding the right balance. How do you weigh the power of one person's vote against the collective voice of an entire state? For the southern states, this whole thing feels like what many are calling a penalty for performance. Their argument is pretty straightforward. They say, hey, we invested in education, we invested in healthcare, we successfully controlled our population growth, and now they're facing the possibility of losing their political voice because they were successful. It's a tough pill to swallow. And if that wasn't complicated enough, there's another huge issue tangled up in all of this: gender equality. You see,
The implementation of the long-awaited Women's Reservation Bill, the one that reserves a third of seats for women, can only happen after this whole delimitation process is done. So the stakes here aren't just about North versus South. They're also about the future of political representation for half of the country's population. So, with the stakes this high, how does India move forward? Well, that brings us to our final section. And for all of you preparing for exams, this is key. Let's talk strategy. How do you take all this complexity and craft the perfect answer?
Okay, so imagine you're sitting in the exam hall and you see this question. It's a classic, right? It's asking you to break down how this whole redistribution thing challenges federalism, lay out the concerns, and this is the most important part, suggest a balanced way forward. So how would you tackle it? Any great answer needs a solid structure. So step 1, the introduction. Define the issue, mention delimitation, Article 82, set the context. Step 2, the body. This is where you analyze the core conflict, democracy versus federalism. Bring in the penalty for performance argument. Show you understand both sides. And finally, step 3, the conclusion. This is where you suggest balanced, forward-looking solutions. And here's a pro tip for you. To really make your answer stand out, use the kind of language that shows a deeper understanding. Talk about a potential constitutional deadlock if a solution isn't found. Mention the existing fiscal tension, since government funding often uses newer population data, which the southern states already feel is unfair. Using terms like these shows the examiner you've really thought this through. So, what does a balanced solution actually look like? Well, this image of a bridge is a great way to think about it. The goal has to be to connect the two sides. On one bank, you have the democratic principle of representation. On the other, the federal need for every state to have a voice. It can't be a zero-sum game. It has to be about finding that stable middle path. So what are some of these concrete ideas for your conclusion? Well, one big proposal is to strengthen the Rajya Sabha, the upper house, to give every state a more equal say, kind of like the US Senate. Another really interesting idea is to give weightage, think of it as bonus points, to states that do well on social development goals. That way, you're actually rewarding them for their progress instead of penalizing them. And that really leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? How can India strike that perfect balance between the pure democratic idea of one person, one vote, and the absolute federal necessity of making sure that every single state, no matter its size, has its voice heard and respected? Finding the answer to that is truly one of the great challenges for the future of Indian federalism.